in little more than 2 decades, we've gone from a position of energy independence to one in which almost half the oil we use comes from foreign countries at prices that are going through the roof. Our excessive dependence on OPEC has already taken a tremendous toll on our economy and our people. This is the direct cause of the long lines which have made millions of you spend aggravating hours waiting for gasoline. It's a cause of the increased inflation and unemployment that we now face. This intolerable dependence on foreign oil threatens our economic independence and the very security of our nation. The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. I will soon submit legislation to Congress calling for the creation of this nation's first solar bank, which will help us achieve the crucial goal of 20% of our energy coming from solar power by the year 2000. These efforts will cost money, a lot of money. And that is why Congress must enact the windfall profits tax without delay. It will be money well spent, unlike the billions of dollars that we ship to foreign countries to pay for foreign oil. These funds will be paid by Americans to Americans. These funds will go to fight, not to increase, inflation and unemployment. I'm proposing a bold conservation program to involve every state, county, and city, and every average American in our energy battle. This effort will permit you to build conservation into your homes and your lives at a cost you can afford.
Well, President Carter, thank you very much for joining us today. The Bioenergy Conference has been going on now for 77 years, and we've wanted you to speak at this conference for a long time, so we're excited about you finally getting you on today. Back in July of 1979, you said, and I quote, "You know we can do it. We have the natural resources. We have more oil in our shale alone than several Saudi Arabias. We have more coal than any nation on earth. We have the most skilled workforce with geniuses, and I firmly believe that we have the national will to win this war." 33 years later, do you still have that same opinion?
Well, I haven't changed my mind, and one thing that's developed since then, as it came out of my energy policy, was the discovery of enormous quantities of natural gas that we didn't know we had. So now the gas in shale has become one of the most important usable energy sources in America, which was really played a minor role back in those days. So I think that what I said then has been made much more accurate even than perhaps it was at that time. We still have a leading scientist, but the thing is that I ask as a question, do we have the national will to do it? Do we have the ability within our country to act politically to move toward use of renewable energy from the sun? I just flew over Copenhagen yesterday, as a matter of fact, on the way home from a long trip, and as far as you could see, nothing but windmills all around there. And of course, we've just begun to use windmills and other sources of energy directly from the sun, which I think in the long run has got to be the primary source of our energy on a sustainable basis.
Definitely. And Craig, Dr. Craig Queen with University of Georgia is in the process of building an energy innovation house in Tifton, and you're incorporating some of the things that President Carter started in his administration?
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to make the house both energy efficient and then add the renewable energies in, solar has, as you know, really just gotten better and better
Yes.
over the years, and so our ability to, produce these net zero energy homes. That's something I'd like to hear some comments.
Well, one thing that I didn't emphasize enough in my first statement was efficiency. That is the conservation of energy. And there, we were able to put into law in America things that have not ever been disturbed. For the first time, we had mandatory efficiency of homes, and also the mandatory efficiency in the labeling of stoves and refrigerators and other appliances. And in industry, mandatory efficiency of electric motors and so forth. So we use a lot less energy now to do a certain amount of work than we ever had before. And those changes, which are in the law, have now been enforced. And I think in the future we'll find more and more opportunities to not waste energy, but to use what we do have in a very sparing way.
I know in your own home, you've put in some solar tubes. How are they working out for you?
Well, we have used that very well, and as a matter of fact, in my home, when I made this speech, we did the same thing. We put solar panels on top of the White House, as you know, to heat the water in the White House. Unfortunately, they were removed with a lot of publicity when President Reagan came into office. He thought it was a symbol of weakness on the part of America to insinuate that we couldn't use all the natural resources that we wanted to. But I think that that's something that's coming back. And now, as you know, there are homes being built that are almost completely neutral on the use of electricity. I was just with Sir Richard Branson this past week in Egypt, and he owns two islands in the Caribbean area, and he's making sure that both of those islands don't require any outside energy. And he has a fairly elaborate homes there, but with windmills and other sources, and with strict efficiency, he's proven that you can do that.
Speaking of using natural resources, as you well know, Georgia has nearly 25 million acres of forest.
Yes.
And at the Hurdy Advanced Materials Development Center, we're working on ways that we can possibly convert those trees into higher and better uses. Currently, we're shipping a lot of pellets to Europe to help them meet their mandates. But in the future, we're hoping to make that barrel of crude out of our trees. Was that something that was thought about in your administration?
Oh, yes. Wood energy was one of the main things that we emphasized. As a matter of fact, in the White House and in the Oval Office area, we put in 5 wood-burning stoves. And then I have one in my home too. It was the best one of all. We tried out all 5 at the White House, and I got the best one of them to put in my own house. But I think that this is another example of renewable energy that can be replaced, and all of the energy comes directly from the sun as a tree grows and becomes mature. And we also, as you know, here in Plains, have planted some especially fast-growing trees called Paulownia that reach maximum size when they're about 7 years old. And I think in the future, the research that's done by Hurdy and others is going to make sure that we in Georgia and throughout the United States use a lot more of the wood energy than we do now. The Europeans have learned first, and now they're buying pelletized wood, as you know, to cut down on the amount of coal and other things that they burn. And so I think that this is something that's going to come in the future. With research and with commitment, particularly from the White House and then through the Congress, I think we'll see this done. At the same time, of course, whenever you have an efficiently produced energy source, you also cut down tremendously on pollution. So all of the pollution is really proof that you have wasted a lot of the energy in doing what you wanted it to do, and you just put it into the atmosphere to destroy the economy, to destroy the environment.
Do you think there'll be an energy policy anytime soon in this country?
I don't know. The Congress is not inclined nowadays to do any of the things, for instance, that Europe has done, to try to have a tax on carbon emissions, or to have a cap and trade program, which has been proven quite workable. And I think that there's a chance that we'll do it in the future, because one of the main holdbacks in America has been the fact that in the earlier stages, like 25 years ago, they didn't include India and China in the overall picture because they weren't using much energy. But now they have become perhaps the foremost producers not only of energies from coal and so forth, but also one of the main producers of pollution in the air. But as the people of China are rising up against their own government in protest, some say 100 protests a day, almost exclusively on the fact that their air and water are polluted, I think their government is going to be forced to have more efficient use of energy. And if China will do it, and India will do it, maybe the United States reluctantly will join these third world countries.
Some other questions, Craig?
Oh, well, you traveled all over the world.
Yes.
And seen so many different policies and so many different ways to get things done successfully. And I guess a follow-up question would be some examples that that come to mind quickly on successful policies implemented by different governments throughout
Yes.
the nation.
Well, for instance, I just spent this last week with a woman named Gro Brundtland. Gro Brundtland was the first female Prime Minister of Norway. And then she became the leader of the World Health Organization. And after that, for the last 20 years, she's been the #1 European leader with the so-called Brundtland Commission to define ways for Europe to conserve energy and to shift toward the use of renewable energy that's derived directly from the sun. So she is really an inspiration to a group called the Elders, and she's also a key player when they had the recent Rio conference on energy. She was one of the main speakers. And I think what she has done in Europe has been a notable success. Now, for instance, my favorite place to go on vacation with my family is to Spain. We go there for a couple of weeks at a time and just drive around. And you can hardly go into a valley and look up on top of the mountains that you don't see windmills. Beautiful white windmills. I think they're very lovely. They don't destroy the appearance of the scenery. I think they add to it. And I just mentioned coming into Copenhagen, and there are hundreds and hundreds of windmills around Copenhagen. We have the same possibility here with wind, off our shores and also in the central parts of our country. So I think the use of wind and tight efficiency and photovoltaic cells, which are becoming more and more efficient, is a thing of the future. As you know, when I left the White House, the United States was in the forefront of both wind energy and also photovoltaic cells. That industry and that prime, I'd say innovative progress on the cutting edge of science has shifted to China. And they also are now leading the world in the use of coal that is so-called clean burning. It's cleaner burning. Coal will never be clean burning, but you can cut by 2/3 the amount of carbon dioxide that comes from a coal burning plant. And China is now in the forefront of that. So China has taken a leadership in scientific experiment on efficiency and protecting the environment and the proper use of energy. I hope in the future the United States will come back into a leadership position.
How about with nuclear? I know during your administration, 3 Mile Island happened. How do you feel about dealing with the spent material now?
I'm a firm proponent of using nuclear power for production. I was there when 3 Mile Island occurred. There was no injury at 3 Mile Island. I was there the next day. My wife and I went to 3 Mile Island and went in the control room just to show the American people that there was no danger, because there was a lot of very fearsome newspaper headlines and that sort of thing. And nuclear power, we have used nuclear power now. I was in the very beginning stages of it. We have used nuclear power for peaceful purposes under the guidance and direction of Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was my boss. Not only to propel ships, but also to produce electricity. So he was the one that was responsible for the peaceful use of atomic power, not just bombs, but support. And for instance, when I was my wife and I went out on a trial of a submarine, Admiral Rickover was with us, and he pointed out that all the ships that he had built that had nuclear power plants, if you put them end to end, would be 12 miles long. There's never been an accident on any of those ships that injured a person, much less killed a person. And we've had the same safety record in the United States on power production. 3 Mile Island is the worst mistake we've ever had, and it did melt down because, I would say, of inadequate attention to safety precautions on the operators, the power company.
Yeah.
And so I ordained a study commission that prescribed very strict safety precautions and training procedures for personnel that operated the plant, and we haven't had a repetition of that. So I think that whenever a nation imposes safety precautions and proper location of the power plants, that nuclear power has a good use in the future.
Do you think we could reuse the spent material?
Yes, there are ways to use the spent material, or either to store it properly. As you know, if a country wants to, they can take the spent nuclear material and make plutonium out of it, and that's what's been done in North Korea. And you can, with massive centrifuge setups, you can purify uranium and just finally get to the explosive part of uranium. So by abuse, you can certainly transfer the spent fuel from power plants into atomic weapons. But I think that with proper safeguards, that can be prevented. And the storage of nuclear materials is quite safe. Now, in fact, ever since nuclear power came into being, now almost 50 years ago, all of the spent nuclear fuel is basically buried on the same ground that the power plant sits on. We never have been able to arrive at an agreement with our government on where to store it deeply. So I think it ought to be stored in Nevada, in the prescribed place. But yeah, you can do it. And the new technology is very encouraging. For instance, there is a system now to develop a nuclear power plant where you don't have spent nuclear fuel. For instance, the USS Jimmy Carter, a submarine named after me, it has a nuclear power plant that will last 45 years. In fact, the nuclear power plant will last longer than the hull of the ship. Whereas now, most of the nuclear power plants, you have to replace the fuel every 3 years. So with new technology like that, you can see that you can get away with having this large amount of so-called spent uranium.
You sound like a nuclear physicist.
Well,
you are.
I studied.
You've mentioned several times about technology,
Yes.
China, India, and others that seem to be advancing more rapidly than we do. Where do you see here in the United States, what can we do to encourage more technological advancements or investment in technology or breaking?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind at all that we have the best engineering and scientific universities on earth. There are no others that compete with Georgia Tech and MIT and Caltech and universities like that. But you have to have some incentive for their students and their graduates to go into the area that's beneficial to society. I'd like to answer your question. How do you induce a young, brilliant engineering student to concentrate in the future on developing renewable energy and more efficient ways to use energy? And there is where the stipends from government grants come in for individual scholarships and also for benefits to, say, Georgia Tech to concentrate on that particular subject. So I think there, again, it's a matter of national policy. If we decide as a nation that one of our major goals is to have the more efficient use of say, solar energy within all of its uses, then I think that over a period of a very short span of time, say 8 or 10 years, you can be producing PhD students whose life is devoted to the more efficient use of energy. We're not doing that now, but I think it can be done in the future. There are some students that are doing that, but I mean, you don't have government encouragement for it, which I think we ought to have.
The changing energy mix, as you mentioned now, a lot of potential where we're reliant on a whole diverse array of
Yes.
renewable and fossil energies. And I guess the question there is on politics again, and how would that change the politics of the world and stability or instability in different regions?
Well, I think if every region of the world could become more self-reliant on its own energy sources, that would be a contribution to peace and to orderly commerce and trade. And any country can do, even if you don't have any luck in having natural gas or coal or oil under your soil, under your surface, you can always concentrate on the efficient use of the energy you do have. And every time you cut down on a barrel of oil that you waste, then that's a barrel of oil you don't have to depend on from a potentially antagonistic country that might hold you kind of ransom as you depend on them. So I think that this is one thing that can be done. And we should be eager to share technology as well. When the more advanced countries like the United States or Europe or somewhere develops a new technique for the proper burning of wood, if the country has trees, or the proper use of other energy sources, say geothermal energy, where it just heat from down as you go toward the center of the earth, you get hot, you get heat. Use of those, that's a very important thing, to share with others that technology without exorbitant cost. We also ought to be careful in all countries to observe the human rights of others, and that is not distribute our waste products from the United States to unsuspecting countries, particularly African nations that are willing to accept the deposit of toxic materials in their property just to get a little bit of money, which they seriously need. We passed laws when I was president that prohibited that kind of transfer of toxic materials to a poor country. But those laws have now been repealed, and we're doing it again. So I think those kinds of things that I would describe as a general subject of human rights, that is respecting the rights of other people, ought to be put back into effect. It's a very complex, interrelated sort of things that apply to almost every human being on earth and every government in the world. But there are a lot of countries that have land that can produce wood products that can be burned. And they can be burned very, very efficiently.
And let me get off the energy subject for just one final question, if you would.
Okay.
I heard a gentleman speak the other day that was asked the question about who in this world has added more to the general health of the world than any other. And he said, President Jimmy Carter. How do you feel when you hear somebody say something?
I'm very gratified by that. Well, the Carter Center has programs in 73 countries in the world. And 80% of our funds and 80% of our personnel are devoted to doing away with diseases that are no longer known in a country even like Egypt, much less in the United States or Japan or China or Europe. And these diseases still afflict hundreds of millions of people in Africa and some in Latin America, and that's what we do. So we go into the most remote villages, in the jungles and in the deserts of, say, Africa, and we go to the village and we deliver to them medicine or teach them how to do things that would prevent their affliction, because there's blindness and worms coming out of their bodies and things of that kind. So that's a very exciting challenge that the Carter Center has adopted. But I'm glad to hear somebody say that when he says Jimmy Carter, he means the Carter Center. Yeah. And of course, as you know, my wife is the number one protector of mental health, and I'm very proud of her about that.
Well, we thank you so much for coming today. I know you've been in how many countries in the last 10 days? 8 or 9?
Eight, I think.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you here at Plains. Thank you. Well, Plains is kind of in the heart of producing pine trees and also a few paulownia trees. So we're very eager to see this source of solar energy used in a more efficient and effective way.
President Carter has donated some of his paulownia trees to the Hurdy Advanced Materials Development Center, so we're going to be pelletizing them and cooking them and see how we can make some higher and better uses out of those trees.
This is the fastest growing tree in the world.
Yeah.
And it's used for furniture making in Japan and China. It's a beautiful wood. In fact, I have made furniture out of it and give it to the Carter Center to be auctioned off. It brought a big price. But over there, they plant the trees very close together, so the grain is close together. Over here, we plant the trees 20 by 20, and so they grow very fast. But it's an excellent tree, and it's the wood won't burn. which is another thing about it. You can use it for waterproof, for fireproof doors. And it is extremely strong. In fact, the first use of polonium in this country was to make the framework for high-speed racing boats, because you had to have very light. It's as light as balsa wood almost.
Mm-hmm.
And
And very strong.
I make some boat paddles out of polonium, and when people pick the paddle up, they can hardly believe it almost goes up in the air. It's so light, but very, very strong. So it's a remarkable wood. Thank you, Jill, for letting me come.
Thank you for
Enjoyed
coming. I
talking to y'all.
appreciate it.